Okay, thank you. Pleased to be here. Pleased to see everybody's still hanging in there, so that's good. I'm going to talk today about our Integrated Watershed Management Plan. This is the plan here. I'm not going to go through this in detail, just kind of hit some highlights. The plan itself, we got about 20 copies sitting on the NSWA booth back as you just enter the main room there, so if you want to pick up a copy, please do that. Otherwise, it's on our website at nswa.av.ca, or you can download it from the website there. Okay. Just going to talk today about a little bit about the background of NSWA, the capacity for the work, a bit about the IWMP itself, just doing some highlights, some of the lessons learned, and then some of the next steps as we move into further implementation of some of the work. So NSWA, we started it back in 2000, so well before Water for Life. We figured there was a need for a watershed group in the basin, started it up and started work. We were appointed a WPAC in 2005, and by that time we had already finished our first State of the Watershed report, so the work was progressing. Lots of organizations, lots of municipal members, industry members, quite a few individual members as well. We have about 5 staff. Our budget currently is around just under $500,000, and about half of that comes from GOA, and we hope that keeps going. The budget is there, but we think it's going to keep going. We have quite a bit of in-kind support. Currently it's about $375,000, so there's a lot of people putting a lot of effort into it, and the government's getting a lot of benefit out of free work from all these extra folks here. The offices and the IT are provided by the City of Edmonton, so that really helps the whole process. Just the executive is myself, Vice President, Treasurer are both from municipalities, and our Secretary is Candace Bannon from Agriculture. She's going to be the next speaker, so she can give you more details. The rest of our board are a wide range of folks from industry, municipalities, forestry, agriculture, Ducks Unlimited, provincial government. So we have a real wide range of opinions on the board. It's not always easy to get consensus when we try to approach an issue, so sometimes it takes quite a bit of going around and back and forth to get to some end point. And so we usually end up with kind of a middle of the road approach, because we've got to get everybody to agree here as to what's going on. So our goals going forward are to demonstrate leadership in watershed planning. So we do lots of technical research studies to kind of fill in the gaps in information. We try to establish collaborative planning and management in the basin, so talk to lots of folks, try and set up organizations that'll work. And to ensure the NSWA is sustainable, we look for clear governance. We've spent this year doing a lot of work on refocusing our governance piece, and has strong capacity. So that's always a bit of an issue in terms of having the right people and having enough funding to do the work. So ongoing issue, that one. So here's our basin. Just a quick overview. The upper basin is mostly forestry, and then the mountains are up here. We have things like a lot of oil and gas exploration, pipelines in the rocky Drayton Valley area with pipelines to Edmonton. We have agriculture from here down to the Saskatchewan border. We have coal-fired power plants in the Genesee area. We have the city itself, and then downstream of the city there's the industrial heartland area around here with refineries, upgraders, chemical plants, so there's a large concentration of stuff there. We'll get back to this a little. Here's the Sturgeon Basin that Leah was just talking about, just northwest of the city. We've done quite a bit in the Vegreville Basin, and Candace is going to talk about this basin, which is a low-flow basin. It's either flood or drought in this basin. It doesn't seem to be anything in between. And just for interest's sake, there's about 90% of the water in the basin is already in the basin by the time it gets to Drayton Valley. So all the water is coming from the headwaters up here, and there's very little added as we go through the basin. Now, there's about 1.2 million people in there. Most of them are concentrated in the metro region here. And again, just on the organization of who's responsible, there's a lot of different counties in the basin. We've contacted most of these counties and have done a lot of work with them, and we've gone out and talked to the counties. We're getting lots of interest from most of these folks, and I'm getting quite a bit of support from them as well. So I think going forward, these folks will play a big role in and developing plans for the whole basin. So again, just a very large, complex watershed. Lots of geographic scales of work, from small sub-watersheds to the big whole basin. Many land use and water issues. Lots of players and jurisdictions, which sometimes a bit of a struggle to work through. We've taken a scientific water resources planning approach, so science-based, try and get all the information, so making decisions based on real science. We try not to take individual approaches to certain things, like, should this gravel pit go ahead or not. We don't get into that. It's more on an overall basis, these are the criteria you should be looking at, that kind of thing. We did make a decision to address basin scale issues first, so we main stem, big issues, and then in the future we hope to get more into some of the sub-watershed planning pieces. We have started that already with Vermilion, and now Sturgeon is going to get going here. We spent a lot of time over the last 10 years developing information. We saw lots of gaps in the information, so we've done lots of publications on River Guide, Stewardship Toolkit, State of the Watershed Report in 2005. We did a Municipal Resource Guide in 2006. We've done lots of technical reports on water use and water quality objectives. We actually have basic water quality objectives for the main stem developed. I'll get into that a little later. Lots of planning reports, and we have a website at nswa.ab.ca. We have Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts that you can access to exchange information. So lots of information available. That's all on our website. And then just in the last few years, as we got into the IWMP, we produced discussion papers on the plan, workbooks on the plan, workbook evaluation of results of the plan. So there's lots of information. And then just lately we produced an atlas here that's for sale for $35. We've got to try and recoup some of the costs here. So, but it's got lots of information on the whole watershed. This plan itself we just talked about here. And Candice is going to talk about Vermilion River Watershed Plan, which is just completed late last year. So onto the plan here, the objectives were to develop strategies to protect drinking water, aquatic ecosystems, and drinking water supplies. So that's the water for life stuff. And to try and integrate land and water planning. So what would it take on the land to make the water quality good and the flows good, and to plan collaboratively with all watershed sectors, which is a bit of a struggle sometimes. But made a big effort to try and go out to stakeholders, get all their feedback, and work that into the plan. And again, complete the final plan in 2012. It was actually released in June of 2012. The objectives, again, just develop strategies to sustain drinking water, aquatic ecosystems for the future, identify land use practices and impacts that affected it, and develop strategies to try and reduce those impacts. Identify critical gaps in watershed knowledge, and there's lots of those, and identify programs or agencies to try and help address those, and lots of consultation with stakeholders. So we had a steering committee set up that was set up in 2005 by the board and got going. It was multi-stakeholder, generally not an expert committee, but a lot of general input. We prepared an issues scan, but for the first few years we really struggled with deciding what should be in the plan, what was a priority, and we just went round and round in circles for quite a while. And we also at that time didn't have enough information, so we did all these technical reports to try and fill some of the gaps to make it a bit easier to decide where the priorities were. So it took a while to get this going. We went through a number of different people on the same committee and went through a couple of chairpersons. And, it was a bit of an effort to do this, so they kind of wore people out a little bit. But eventually by 2009, we were getting into actually developing goals and strategies and starting to come together here. So the steering committee did develop the goals, directions, and actions for the plan. And then they sent that back to the board and said, well, okay, take this, make it into an overall plan. So we hired a consultant, Susan Abels here, to prepare a discussion paper and a workbook on the goals and directions. And so they worked together with them and produced a report that went out to the public in 2011. Lots of feedback we got from that, and we had a workbook for specific questions to answer. We got lots of feedback on that as well. We had all the feedback analyzed statistically by Naomi Krugman at the U of A, and so that she was able to separate all the questions out and look at who was responding and where the favorable responses were. Generally, we were getting very strong support for the goals and the directions, but some of the action items, we were getting a bit of pushback. We were getting 60 to 90% acceptance of some of the action items, and generally it was because they were too specific, or they identified somebody to do something and they didn't like being identified as somebody who should be doing something. So we pulled back a bit and rewrote some of the action items to be a little more general, with the idea that, you know, as we got into implementation, you would identify more clearly who should be doing the work. So again, it's just, you know, to get to consensus, we had to adjust it a little bit. And then the board and staff prepared the final plan. So here's the plan itself. The overall actions and responsibilities were identified into these five major goals: water quality, water supply, aquatic ecosystem protection, groundwater, and then management, the alignment of the land and water planning, you know, just how do you do the management piece. I'm just going to highlight some of the things that are in there. Under water quality, one of the directions was to develop and implement water quality objectives. So we've actually done that for the main stem for about 20 objectives. We still have to look at, maybe we'll get into the tributaries and develop some objectives for the tributaries, and also widen it into a broader range of contaminants. And other directions like manage total contaminant loads from all point and non-point sources so that the water quality objectives are met. So there's a whole lot of action items under that. And then develop and implement an integrated monitoring and evaluation program so that you could monitor the water quality in the main stem and tributaries, which hasn't happened yet. And you know, we're kind of waiting to see what Ernie Huey and his group do in terms of monitoring and see what needs to be done in addition to that. But that's an expensive piece of the whole project going forward. And then for water supply, we're looking at assessing and developing in-stream flow needs for the basin, and then managing quality in the basin, you know, to meet those needs, and so on. Under aquatic ecosystem health, there's a whole pile of stuff. Maintain and restore wetlands, you know, considering the number, extent, and function. Maintain and restore riparian areas. Minimize, reduce impacts of resource, transportation, utilities industries. Minimize, reduce impacts of municipal industrial development. Implement fish management objectives. So there's a whole range of things under the plan, and then there are individual action items under there that we would look at specific projects to do. So, you know, lots of stuff, and I'd advise you to read the plan and kind of go through it in detail, and you can just see where we're going with some of these things. The plan specifically asks stakeholders to consider the plan from making decisions that affect the watershed. So the plan is advice to both the GOA and to stakeholders to use to make a watershed plan that works. So it's not mandatory, it's a voluntary piece of action, but we're hoping that the GOA will pick up on it, quite a bit of it, and that the stakeholders will pick up on it also. And we're actually getting some success. There are some of the stakeholders already starting to implement some of the pieces in the plan and to put that into their municipal development plans, and you know, so the process is beginning, but it's a slow process. And again, work collaboratively with other interests to implement the plan. So again, it's, you know, who does the work, who does what, which groups have to work together, still not totally clear. And we'll continue to promote watershed values and best management practices. So we're hoping everybody, all the stakeholders will do that and try and move the whole thing forward. Some of the lessons learned. This is definitely a voluntary model of participation, funding, and implementation, which is good and bad. It's, you know, you can join if you want, but what we're finding is we're getting a fair bit of participation, especially from municipalities, but not 100%. So some folks are quite keen, some are just there to see what's going on, and some are staying away from it right now. We've had some of them say, well, wait a minute, this is a government job, government should be doing this, you know, we're not participating. So that's still there, so it is a bit of a problem. Industry generally are participating. We're not getting a lot of funding from industry. We need to get to those guys and see if we can get a bit more. We are trying to get 50 cents per head for municipalities for funding, and we've been reasonably successful in getting that, so that's really helping, but again, it's not 100%. Again, complex issues, it has to be science-based. We try and make sure we've got the science to say this is what we should be doing. And if it's unclear, then we just have to say, well, we don't know, this is unclear. Extensive engagement and education is required. We're finding a lot of the players just don't have the background, and it needs a lot of education to bring them up to speed with this is why we're making this recommendation, because of all these other factors. So there needs to be a lot of that going on. And then you also need to do a lot of engagement. You need to go out and talk to folks repeated times. Go out and talk, give them the basic plan, go out and talk again, give them some of the details, get some feedback, go out and talk to them again. So it's a very labor-intensive process to keep everybody informed. Some of the partners have limited capacity, just in terms of manpower, resources, and funding to do some of the work. So I'm not sure where that's going. There's some requirement, I think, from municipalities going to have to pick up some of this work, but I don't know where the funding is going to come from for them to be able to do it. So it's still a question. And it is a long-term commitment. I mean, this is a 10, 30, 50-year plan here. This is not going to be fixed overnight. It's going to take a long time, so you're going to have to keep at it for a long time. We keep asking GOA to do this. If the model is to work, then the GOA has to be more encouraging and more definitive about who has to be involved. If it's voluntary, is it mandatory? If they want to participate, if they want things to happen, they should be there, helping do the work and helping fund it as well. So we're still getting comments back about sectors being unclear about what is their role, who's supposed to be doing the work. Is government still doing pieces of it? Is it somebody else? And that really needs to be clarified going forward, because it's really hindering the full development of the work if people aren't sure what's going on. And again, we can do a whole lot of things, but some things we need the government to do. We need a wetland policy, so that we can say to people, this is what's happening. We need some more riparian protection. We can provide lots of advice on, these are the things that should happen, but a lot of that is known already. Like, it's not rocket science. It's out there. We need some clear requirements for, these are the things that should be happening. We need more work on lake management. Lots of lakes with very little monitoring going on and very little protection, so that needs to happen certainly. And under lake management, I'd include tributaries. There's very little work done on tributaries at all, and some of them are in fairly bad shape. So there really needs to be, some monitoring and some management work done on direction of where they should be going, and government could really help there. And the environmental monitoring piece, we're waiting for Arnie to come forward with the big plan. I'm not all that optimistic that it's going to solve a whole lot of issues real fast, so I think it's going to take quite a while to get that developed. If they spend a couple of years doing the LARP, the rest of us are just waiting around for a while. So hopefully the new agency would at least take a look at the rest of the province and come up with some basic criteria for, this is the way we're going to be doing things, even if they don't do anything, just so that we know, how it's going to develop going forward. And again, we need to know how the land use framework and the Municipal Government Act and the IWMP, how they align. It's still a bit fuzzy. The South Saskatchewan Basin Plan is coming out hopefully by June. And that should provide a good indication of how the government's going to run these regional plans. The LARP one is a bit different because it's kind of more specific to the oil sands. But the South Saskatchewan one should provide a good picture of how they're going to handle the more municipalities, agriculture, forestry, mixed industry. So the NSR plan we hear is maybe going to start this fall. So it's a possibility, although it's still a bit up in the air. But once we see the South Saskatchewan plan, then we get a pretty good idea of what's going to be in the land use plan. But then beyond that, we still need to know, okay, well, how do watershed management plans and municipal requirements fit into that plan? So lots of work going forward. Just looking at implementation then. One thing we dug up, and we just have to keep reminding ourselves that under the Municipal Government Act, there's a section under miscellaneous powers. that subject to any other enactment, the municipality has the direction, control and management of rivers, streams, watercourses, lakes and natural water bodies. So you read that and you think, well, municipalities should be doing a lot of this, but generally they haven't had the resources to do a lot of this and know the information or the money. So we're not quite sure how this is going to be working, but I think it needs to be clarified again under the land use framework, and maybe clarifying the Municipal Government Act as who's actually responsible for managing the work. We can provide lots of information on the advice as to how it should be done or what should be done, but somebody actually has to manage it going forward, and so that needs to be real clear. So our commitment going forward is we look at ourselves as a bridging organization. We can provide the background information, we can provide advice, linkage between various groups, but we're not a management group. Somebody has to do the management. We can support the development of watershed partnerships, so we get together with municipalities and help them going forward if they need the help. We're going to establish and manage expert working groups, so we're just starting that process, so water quality, quantity, ecosystem health, groundwater and so on. We'll get into those and just try and again develop more technical information to try and define the areas that are issues, and if we can bring advice forward to government on those, we'll do that. And then just to provide information, advice and assistance to all parties in support of implementation of the plan. So we'll try to keep gathering the information, providing the information forward to people, and providing some direction as to we think these are the priorities going forward. And I'll just finish up here with some work on partnerships. We've done a whole lot of work with the folks in the Vermilion River Subbasin. They had a very active group there, and they actually got as far as completing their watershed management plan in December this year, so it's a big step forward. That's our first subbasin plan. Candace was going to talk a bit about that in the next presentation. But again, a bit of a struggle to get it up and going, but once it was going, there was a lot of buy-in, again, especially from municipalities and some of the local agricultural groups, so a fair good success there. We've done smaller things like Mayatan Lake. There was a talk yesterday. We helped them write a state of the watershed report for a small lake and a small sub-watershed, so that's just kind of an example of the kind of thing you can do for some smaller projects. The Sturgeon River Basin, folks have just completed their state of the watershed report, and Leah gave a number of talks there. And so in the future, we're going to work with them on trying to develop a watershed management plan that kind of links to our watershed management plan and see if we can have some synergies there going forward. And the last one I want to talk about is the Industrial Heartland-Capital Region Water Management Framework. This is a government-led initiative, so it's GOA-led with the major stakeholders, the major discharges in the Edmonton metro region. So this region goes from Devon, just upstream of Edmonton, to Pecan, downstream of, this is the city and the surrounding communities, and then the industrial heartland up here with refineries, upgraders, chemical plants. There's a big concentration of industrial folks in this area. So the idea was to look at what the quality coming in from Devon, see what the impact of the city was and the heartland was, and then look at the quality down here. This started about 5 years ago. It's taken a long time to develop, gather all the information, look at the data. The government spent over $1 million on developing this plan. So again, it's not a cheap process. It takes a lot of effort to get something going. But they had all the stakeholders look at the data, decide on what should be happening to the water coming through the city. NSWA had developed basic water quality objectives for the river, and as time progressed, those were adopted by this framework as the objectives for the river. And those are much stricter than the Alberta Surface Water Quality Guidelines. They're basically current ambient conditions. So keep everything to current conditions, don't let it degrade. So that's a big step forward in terms of, as your population grows and industry grows, that means you have to keep having more removal and more removal to keep it the same as it is now. So that's kind of the way it's being aimed at. There were a few parameters where the consensus was, I guess, that they need to be maybe reduced a little bit more, so generally nutrients. There were some impacts downstream in terms of macrophyte growth, so there's some work looking at taking those down a little lower. The point we've got to here is we've developed maximum acceptable cumulative loads for the whole region. So you look at everything going in and set a load at Pecan that says, okay, the maximum load going in for about 20 parameters is this number, it can't be more than this number. So then what we do, and we're just about to get into that process, is go back and look at allocating all the different dischargers. You know, they get their share of that maximum load. You know, you get this much, you get this much, you get this much, based on historical data, basically. And then each of those facilities will have to sit down with government and look at their approval, and they'll have some time frame to see how they're going to manage to meet that that maximum acceptable load. So this is quite a bit different from the way the government's done it in the past. It's usually been just point discharge. You have to meet certain conditions at your discharge. So it's not that anymore. It's looking at the cumulative load of the whole thing, and then deciding, you know, what the number should be, and then everybody has to manage to meet to that load. So, you know, it's a big change, and just about done. So over the next year or two, we'll develop, you know, more specific things for each of the dischargers, and go forward from there. So the water management piece for the central region of the NSR Basin is almost there. This is going to be managed going forward for most of the point discharges. What's not done is there's been sort of no work done on non-point discharges. So everything upstream of Devon, all the forestry, agriculture, well, smaller municipalities upstream still has to be addressed, and then everything downstream of Pecan again has to be addressed as well. So now we're looking at more of the NSWA would focus on the upstream and downstream, looking at the sub-basins. Now we're looking at more non-point stuff, and a few point sources, but maybe more of the non-point stuff. So lots of work to go, but again, a lot of work has been done, and you know, this is I think the province was they started off calling this a pilot, which they might transfer to other regions of the province. So I'm not sure where that's going, but it looks to be in place now. So okay, and I'll stop there. I think just we'll finish with now we get into some of the heavy lifting. This is the expert working groups. We'll set those up and get people involved and move forward on that.